Hey, welcome to the OK Podcast YouTube channel. I'm your host, Sean Perrin, and I want to encourage you, if you like this kind of video, do check out my podcast about Radiohead. I've got like 20 episodes now, and there's some content even with Clive Deemer, who's one of the drummers for Radiohead, and Steve Hamilton, who recorded saxophone on Kid A, and a bunch of other really great episodes, and I've got some more planned for the future. But today, I wanted to just answer a question that came in on Reddit. Why is my favorite album of all time Kid A? Now, someone asked me this, and at first I kind of gave a snarky response. I was like, well, honestly, it just is. It's my favorite. What am I going to do about it? I'm almost 40 years old now. You know, typical Radiohead fan, I guess. I was about 20. Actually, no, I was about 18 only when Even Hail to the Thief came out. So I was like only 16 when Kid A came out, something like that, maybe even 15. This is a pivotal time for discovering new music. I feel so lucky to have been alive during that time. But there was a period in my life where, you know, you can't even have a friend or a girlfriend who doesn't like the same music as you, right? I mean, can you imagine as a 16-year-old or 18-year-old dating someone who doesn't relate to your music taste? Like, that's what makes you up at that point, right? As time has gone on, you know, you start to care less about these things. Like at nearly 40 years old, like, I feel like I'm out of fucks to give sometimes, you know? And I am. I don't really care what someone else thinks about my music taste. It's my music taste, and I want it to be mine, and it's personal, and it doesn't matter to me that someone does or does not like whatever album. I'm not going to be online fighting about it anymore. But the person sort of said to me, you know, I don't like the response that it's just your favorite an artist's subjective, like, what if I want to like it too? Or they sort of said, like, what is your explanation? Like, there must be some deeper meaning. So I thought about it a little bit, and I think that they're right. I mean, I have a very subjective attachment to Kid A for a lot of reasons. But if I do think, like, what actually makes it the best album of all time, not only for me, but in general, I think there actually are some pretty compelling reasons. So if we look at the Radiohead career arc, you start off with Pablo Honey, this sort of project that came out of nowhere, and pretty much the whole album would have been forgettable, I'm sure, except for Sean Slade, one of the producers, pushed for Creep to become a single. And I don't know that Radiohead would have become the band they are today without that single happening. They sort of hit this one-hit wonder stardom, or they could have become a one-hit wonder. They should have become a one-hit wonder, but they didn't. And everyone expected them to, and they even kind of acted like they were going to become a one-hit wonder, with Tom throwing himself in that stupid pool and acting like just they weren't quite sure who they were yet, you know? And then the band is quoted as saying, even by the time of the Bends, Tom York's writing really kind of snapped into place. It kind of started to improve, and the songs became a lot more cohesive. And then we had this success of songs like High and Dry and Fake Plastic Trees getting some radio play. But really, the song that struck me on the Bends is probably more like Street Spirit, or even the opening track, Planet Telex. These are much more sort of foreshadowing where the band would go, in my opinion. And I think that just the success of this album was a next step, which said, wait a minute, we are here to stay. We want to contribute some decent music. We can contribute some decent music to the rock scene, the alternative rock scene at the time. And they sort of solidified their place. So we had this band that started off as this potential one-hit wonder. It turned on a lot of fans to their music, a lot more than probably would have otherwise been expected with a debut album, like I said, that were available and around to appreciate and sort of take in this second album effort. I think that today we sort of discount the effect that the climate of music had back then on elevating artists too. I mean, the whole music videos, CDs, labels, radio, this is all what at the time allowed music to bubble up to the top. Today, it's not like that. I mean, if you get on the right Spotify playlist, that's how you sort of get noticed, right? But Radiohead also did a very interesting thing. They listened, I think, to their label, as much as we don't want to admit this. For the first 3 albums, they really did. They went on extensive tours all over the place. They really got known and recognized, not only for being a studio band, not only for being on the radio, but being on tour and opening for some huge artists like REM, who they could have only hoped to be like back in the 90s. So we had the Bends, and now they sort of had the slate for their third album And I think they nailed it. They went ahead and produced one of the best albums of all time, OK Computer. And this only elevated them further. And of course, the media attention, the radio play back then, everything just continued to pick them up. And they were much more popular in the 90s, I think, than we really take credit for or realize today, perhaps, because they've sort of fallen into obscurity a little bit as part of the left turn they took with Kid A and the subsequent albums. But the peak Radiohead excitement and of the fan base, for sure, I think, was probably around that time of OK Computer. They had, what was it, a 2.5-year tour or something? And that was kind of what almost broke up the band in time for Kid A and the music that followed. So, but they'd sort of accomplished more in those 3 albums than a lot of rock bands do in their entire career. And if we think about the time frame here, that was 4 years from 1993 to 1997. Now, of course, they started releasing demos and things like that earlier, but I mean, the release of Pablo Honey to the release of OK Computer was only 4 years. It's remarkable. We've been waiting twice that long for anything to come out since A Moon-Shaped Pool, right? So we had this period of time where they were basically the biggest rock band probably in the world, maybe after U2, but musically, I would say far ahead of U2, right? So we have this amazing opportunity for them to, what the label would want, is to have an OK Computer 2. Let's do that again, Let's have a second round of one of the greatest albums, accessible to generally. I mean, it's a bit of a hard listen at first, I suppose. There's a lot going on, but not really. I mean, OK Computer is something that it's kind of like Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, many people can appreciate that album. It has relatively typical instrumentation. It's a good album, and many people recognize it for that. So to Kid A now, I mean, everything about it is so interesting. The way that it leaked online, the way that the lyrics and things were, drawn out of a hat sometimes, and the songs are not really even songs per se. I mean, especially when you get into the Amnesiac era. But the album itself, as everybody knows, it's the classic story of what happened, is that it took a huge left turn from where Radiohead was going at the time. And to me, it was just so brazen and interesting. But it also didn't strike me right away. I remember when I first got Kid A, I was like, what is this? This is not really what I was expecting. And the fans at the time, I'm sure many of them felt the same way. It took me a lot of listens to really get into it. And it actually wasn't until one time I remember listening to it in my parents' car. I was kind of falling asleep in the back of the car on a road trip or something. And that sort of half asleep state where you're sort of in and you're sort of out, I was in that state. And National Anthem started playing and obviously woke me up. And I'd sort of fallen asleep during Kid A. But National Anthem had kind of perked me up, so I was not quite asleep anymore, but not quite awake in that half space, like I said. And it transitioned into How to Disappear completely. And that was the moment where it clicked for me. I was like, holy shit, this is a beautiful album. There's something going on here. There's more layers than meets the ear at first, And so that was the track that really struck me. And then I remember listening to the live album. I might be wrong. And I was listening to Idiotech, the live version, and it kind of clicked for me after hearing the live one. The album one made a lot more sense. And this is a typical experience with the music. But I had this sensation where Idiotech, I was sort of almost angry listening to it because I was like, I can't stop repeating it. It doesn't quite give me what I want. Every time I have to listen again and again and again. And I had this doubt about their songwriting ability. I was like, why can't they just give me what I need with the song? It doesn't really climax properly. It's sort of weird. But then I had this epiphany where I was like, oh my God, that's the genius of the song. It makes you play it again and again and again. There's sort of this need to hear it over and over and over. And the interesting part about their music, and Kid A especially, and what I guess I love the most about it, is even after 20 years of listening to it, there are times when maybe I have new headphones or I'm just in a different headspace or whatever, that I still hear new layers, new interesting things are kind of being uncovered. And the music, by sort of asking you to listen to it again and again, is exposing itself slowly to you in that way. And I think that, to me, that's what kind of makes it the best, is because it's very dense. There's a lot going on, but it's also on the surface you can appreciate it for what it is as well, I suppose. so that's the music itself. Like, I appreciate the layers. I often think about it like a bunch of stained glass pieces set on top of each other. Like, you can sort of look around and see different perspectives. The mix is very sort of transparent. There's little blippy things going on which somehow don't detract from the music, but they're there and you can follow them throughout the song. It's a very interesting experience. But yeah, almost like a glass onion or stained glass or something like that. You can just keep peeling off these layers and seeing through the music. It's incredible. It's very cool. And in no way would it have been as interesting if it was like just a Rhodes piano and Tom's voice. It might have been still a great song, I suppose, but there's this sort of glassiness and this consistent atmosphere about the music, which I don't think anything else really sounds like it. It's totally unique. There's things that inspired it. There's certainly things that came after it that sound similar to that, but as a soundscape, as a brazen artistic effort, like it's just, I don't think there's anything else that really comes close. But it goes deeper than that for me. A lot of songs like, Strawberry Wine, that classic song, I can't remember who wrote it right now, but it's obviously about, some girl who sleeps with somebody down by the river or whatever, and they share strawberry wine, and it's about that first summer, whatever. It's a very literal song, but I really hate that kind of music because, like, I don't really relate to that song at all. I don't really get anything from it. And there's a lot of songs like that where they're about something very specific, and I don't want to listen to a song that is like that, I guess. I want the music to leave space for me as a listener. And what's really cool about it is there's a place in Jeff Tweedy's book, who's the lead singer of Wilco, but he was talking about how it's really hard to write a song about nothing. It's actually harder to write it about nothing than to write it about something. And for me, Kid A completely, in many instances, like during Everything in Its Right Place, completely nails this. I mean, we're listening to a guy singing about pretty much almost nothing at times. Like, I woke sucking a lemon and all this weird stuff. And Tom York would tell you, I'm sure, that some of these lyrics just came out of a hat and were placed together by sort of no rhyme or reason. And we're really asked to appreciate the melody, the shape of the words, and to kind of let them sort of wash over you in their own way. And you place meaning or don't place meaning or just appreciate the melody or whatever you're doing, but it becomes very personal and very yours. And there's something very special about that. Like, Everything in Its Right Place would have been a very different song if it was specifically about some instance, I think that as a band, they really allowed the voice to come through and be an instrument, which is very cool. I've always wondered behind the scenes what that was like. I mean, what's it like telling Colin Greenwood, hey, I just played the bass line for your part on track 3. I hope you don't mind. And Philip, we don't actually have a part for you on half these songs, and some of them are going to use a drum machine. I mean, hope that's okay. Do you want to grab another coffee? Or, Ed, I mean, can you put down that guitar and come grab this weird machine that's going to make bleepity sounds for the whole entire song instead? I mean, what was that like? No wonder the band almost got ripped apart. But anyway, I guess in a nutshell, I mean, I like it because the music means a lot to me, but artistically, experimentally, it was also just a huge undertaking. And I think the evidence is in the music that they had an entire second album released within a year of more pieces or songs from that session. And there's even more. I mean, we got even more of it with the Kid Amnesia box set that came out 20 years later, right? So I think it stood the test of time. For me, I don't think any album will ever replace it. And really, like, when I met Tom York, I was able to say to him, like, hey, thank you for this album. It means so much to me. The music changed my life. And he laughed and said, me too, man. Me too. So anyway, that's the answer to the question. If you have any other sort of thoughts or questions about Radiohead you want to sort of ask me about, go ahead and post them in the comments below. I want to use this opportunity to say, hey, subscribe to this YouTube channel. I want to talk a lot more about Radiohead. I've got some new episodes coming out of the podcast soon, and I've actually started a couple playlists. One is a bunch of bands that sound kind of like Radiohead, give you that sort of same feel, and I'll put a link to those in the comments below as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.